Welcome to the SENDCast. My name is Dale Pickles, Managing Director of B Squared and the host of the SENDCast. Each week on this podcast, we talk about a different topic within the world of special education needs and disability to improve our knowledge, to provide support to professionals working in schools, and to empower parents. In this episode, we discuss developing distributive leadership in secondary schools to improve inclusion. What that really means is I talk to an assistant head teacher and SENDCO in a secondary school who's actually doing all the things we said they should be doing in secondary schools, and it's making a difference, which is phenomenal. And this week I was joined by Eleanor Sams. She is the assistant head teacher and SENDCO from the Marvel College in Hull. And Ellie became assistant head teacher and SENDCO in 2022 and has worked with the rest of the senior leadership team to develop a culture of inclusion that runs throughout all areas of the school. Using relationships, pushing on inclusion, increasing attendance, reducing disturbance, reducing behaviour incidents, all because of all the stuff we talk about in the podcast, doing it all and it making a difference. The SENDCast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. We help to show the small sets of progress pupils with SEND make, and we can help schools show progress for a wide range of abilities and ages. We have a range of frameworks to suit students from birth all the way through to 25 with our Steps for Life framework, which can assess functional academic skills, employabilities and life skills. On the other end of the spectrum, for our most complex learners, we have our engagement steps for those on the engagement model. And engagement steps helps build a profile of the student's needs and show the progress they're making, however small. Visit the B Square website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software. Now, let's get on with that podcast. My guest on this week's episode is Eleanor Sams, an assistant head teacher and SENDCO from the Marvel College in Hull. I always thought it was in the US somewhere, the Marvel College, but that's different. Ellie became the assistant head teacher and SENDCO in 2022 and has worked with the rest of the senior leadership team to develop a culture of inclusion that runs throughout all areas of the school. And alongside her role at Marvel College, Ellie supports other schools across the trust as a SEND Hub leader. She is also a trustee at Hembuston Park Special School and has talked at a number of events about inclusion. Welcome to the show, Ellie.
Thank you for having me, Dale. It's lovely to be here.
You are very welcome. Now, I've been working in SEND for close to 25 years, and I think one of the most challenging roles in a school in terms of being effective in your role and working collaboratively with others is the SENDCO in a secondary school. And a number of secondary schools use our software to track progress for their SEND pupils, but implementation can be a really big challenge. That strong leadership that believes in supporting people SEND is a big requirement that isn't always there. But with your school, you've obviously got that working perfectly.
Yeah, and I absolutely echo sort of the sentiment of what you've said there, Dale. I think sort of the growing expectations on SENDCOs is becoming unmanageable in lots of schools, and you can sort of see in national press SENDCOs leaving in sort of droves, and what do we do about that is the big question on lots of schools' sort of lips at the moment. I think that sort of comes from a pressure to be a growing expert in everything, and sort of to be this superhero wearing this cape that people will come to, and you have all the answers. And I think as humans, that's obviously not always going to be the case, but that builds a pressure and that expectation. And I think that has sort of increased in recent years. And I think largely, especially in sort of mainstream secondary schools where you can have SEN registers of 260 plus students, you can't possibly teach and know all of those students inside out. So as you say, sort of that comes with lots of different challenges. So it's about, I think, looking at that big picture and working as a team rather than having your SENDCO as this sort of superhero that comes in. And I use that analogy because I think it's a really pertinent one.
It is. So you've been a SENDCO now for 3 years at the school.
Mm-hmm.
How much has the school changed in terms of what teaching looked like, what the day... Has anything changed, or would it look, if you went back 3 years ago, would it look the same?
No, it would look very different. And I don't think that that's something that I have achieved on my own. I think that's something that as a senior leadership team, we've worked really hard to promote a culture of inclusion. And I think it always stems from that. And I think that is for SENDCOs that are new to role, or for head teachers and senior leadership teams looking at what their priorities might be for the new school year. I think that golden thread of inclusion cannot just happen with your SENDCO wearing that superhero cape. So I think unless inclusion is part of your sort of core school improvement priorities and your core ethos, that will never improve. And I think that a good example of that would be that on your senior leadership team, do you, when you make any decision, whether it's safeguarding, attendance, behaviour, do you ask yourselves the question, and what does this mean for our pupils with SEND? And what does this mean for our most vulnerable pupils? Because actually, those decisions have the biggest impact on the most vulnerable students in our schools. And that might not just be pupils with SEND, but of course our pupils with SEND will sit under that umbrella. And I think that that's really where the work needs to start for senior teams, because if leaders don't live and breathe a vision for inclusion, it will never sort of disseminate into your middle leaders and then all the rest of your teaching staff, because actually it's not about the SENDCO standing up on inset day for half an hour and talking about SEND and the code of practice and sort of in addition to and different from. It's about those conversations that happen through the year between all of our teams and that professional curiosity, and making sure that when we make those decisions in January, in March, in April, that our pupils with SEND sit at the heart of that for inclusion to truly be sort of realised within our schools.
I think a difference, like in a primary school, you can sort of get away with a SENDCO standing up and leading. Yep. They are a small number of people, 10, 20 staff around them. They can be leading on it and pushing it. When that staff number increases hugely in a special school and you've got different departments, it's not just the SENDCO who has to lead. Every leader, so the senior leaders, the subject leaders, the person who's leading the English department, the head, needs to be leading on inclusion and what English looks like for pupils with SEND. It has to be there for it to be effective.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it comes back to that all teachers being teachers of SEND. And that's really sort of a goalpost for lots of schools that is never realised. And I think there's lots of different reasons for that. And I think that going back to your earlier point of where were we at 3-4 years ago, I think there was definitely a nervousness or a borderline fear in some cases of teaching pupils with SEND. And I think I see that a lot in secondary schools particularly because of the vast number of pupils that we teach. You know, you could teach in a week easily 250 pupils, and your job is to be an expert in all of those children. And I think as teachers, we go to university and we get our degrees. So first and foremost, I've been a history teacher. So to become a history teacher, I needed to know everything that there is to know about the Normans, the Vikings, Nazi Germany, American West. And I can stand up in front of children and be an expert in my subject. So when I have a room full of pupils and there are 7 or 8 different sort of needs in that room that I don't feel like I'm the expert in, I become disempowered and I become nervous. And that then makes me lose the confidence in my adaptive teaching in the things I'm really, really good at, because naturally I want to be an expert in those children so that I can give them the best that I can. And I think that's where then we go and we knock on the SENDCO's door, because we want to be able to truly understand those children to give them the best that they need. And that's where a lot of our work has sort of really drilled into how do we empower staff that they do know their children and that they can teach them really, really well, because that is sort of, I think, fundamentally what's happening in our secondary schools, especially as our SEND registers are getting bigger and bigger.
Definitely. And it's that confident with challenge. So, confident in that delivering the teaching, delivering that content, adapting it all correctly. One of the things I think, again, if you've listened to the podcast recently, you hear me bashing secondary schools a lot. And it's not the people in the school, it's the system I'm generally bashing, because a lot of schools I come across, my daughter's school, aren't inclusive. And I know how much of a big challenge it is. And I know that I think most staff spend most of their time managing poor behaviour. So as you've kind of made that school become more inclusive, has there been an impact on behaviour and disruptiveness in the classroom?
Yeah, well, I think behaviour comes down to behaviour is communication. And I think that relationships sort of are the key for everything, no matter with what with any child that you teach in your class of 34 children, if you know your children well and you have strong relationships, that will always be key to those children wanting to be in your classroom, feeling wanted and needed and feeling like they're ready to learn. So fundamentally in our school, relationships come first. And actually, before we did any work on on SEND, the first part of our journey in inclusion was a journey of relationships. And that is always a really key thing for us in our school. So actually, do you know one thing about each child in your classroom? Do you know their favourite hobby? What pets they've got at home? Just one thing can really make that child feel seen in a classroom, especially in such big schools. And I think that's really, really important.
And that's the thing, what you've just said is more or less the golden rule book of the importance of those relationships. Relationships come first. If you have the relationship, the disruption drops because they feel belonging and the learning happens. And I think that the whole bit there, I think people forget because they're worried about getting through the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they're trying to get through that curriculum without those relationships, they're then seeing the amount of work and worrying about, well, how can I support SEND? I'm already so overloaded. But actually, by building those relationships, you are reducing that disruption. That child wants to learn and wants to be there and wants to learn from you, and you will learn how they learn so you can support them better.
I think as well, when you add that extra layer in of diagnostic reports, which can be 50, 60 pages long, and you can have a child with 10 different diagnostic reports and an EHCP plan that you have to read because it's your statutory duty, suddenly you've got 200 pages to read before you even started the 1st of September just for one child that you teach as well. So I think what we really focus on is that culture first of professional curiosity, of not working independently with that child, of working as a team around that child. And we've built a system that helps us to know our pupils well, because what we say to new staff, to ECTs, is actually build your relationship first, get to know pupils first, and then start to peel those layers back. Because actually, if you start from the opposite end, you will never sort of scale that mountain, if that makes sense. It's about knowing how that pupil sort of falls in your classroom first. And I think one thing that we are really proud of is we've created a system, we call it our SEND champion system, where every pupil with SEND on the SEND register has a champion, but underneath that, each pupil has a passport. And lots of schools do this really, really well. But our passports, each teacher that teaches that child, they firstly write down something that child does really well in their classroom. So we start with the successes, we start with all the positives, because there are always lots and lots of positives. Then something they're developing in their classroom, so something they're starting to work on. So it might be embedding quotations in English, it might be remembering key facts and dates in history or geography, and then a strategy to help them work towards that thing that they're struggling with, and a strategy that's working to help them work towards that sort of goal. And when we fill those in, we put our staff code and the subject on there, and all teachers of that child can see them. So what's great about that is it promotes that professional curiosity, it promotes that teamwork. So when I go onto a child's passport I'm starting teaching this group in September, I didn't teach this child last year, I want to get to know them, I've got 10, probably in a secondary school, 10 really good strategies that have been proven to work across the curriculum already before I've met that child. I know what they're really, really good at, so I know how to build success into my lesson plans, but I also can touch base with those members of staff. So I have got that community around me. So actually, I can go and see their geography teacher from last year or their English teacher from last year. Tell me about that thing that you did that helped them with embedding quotations, because we're finding that a bit of a sticking point at the moment. So it means that staff have other experts in the school that they can go to. And of course, someone coming to you and saying, you've done a great job, help me with how you've achieved that, then promotes that confidence in yourself as well. So it goes back to that, unpicking that nervousness, empowering our teachers, because actually the skills are already there. It's about that community and that empowerment of each other. The other part that works really, really well is we have a final box, because our SEND champions check in with pupils 3 times a year, and they tell them those things they're doing really well, and they tell them the things that staff are doing to help them in their lessons and support them. And in that box, we put some key things from that check-in. Where that's worked really well is where it says things like, Dylan loves wrestling, or Bobby plays football on the weekend, or Shania wants to go to university to study this. Because actually, again, when they come in my classroom the 1st of September, oh, I hear you like wrestling. I went and saw somebody wrestling over the summer. It gives you those tools to build those relationships straight off the bat. So that really sort of underpins that sort of aim of inclusion before we've even set foot into the building on the very first day in September.
I've got lots of questions, but the first one I want to ask you is what you've just talked about there is one of the challenges I've heard from lots of schools, which is you are a teacher, you teach X number of students this year. How do you signpost to teachers you've got 15 children this year with EHCPs or with support plans? How do you signpost to each teacher which profiles to go and read? How do you get that communication? Because I go to schools and they said, oh, the stuff's on the SEN drive, go have a look. And you're like, well, which children do I have to look at? Do I have to look at my list and find a list of all 300 children I'm looking at and then match them up? How do you kind of manage that process? Because that's the sort of thing that a lot of schools struggle with.
So we use provision mapping, and on that software, it allows us to, you can literally click a button that says pupils with SEND, pupils I teach, and it filters the whole school and just the pupils you teach that year with SEND. But the key thing to help staff be able to manage that is that because inclusion is at the heart of our school improvement priorities and at the heart of everything that we do, we build that time in. Because one thing that schools don't have is time. So actually, we make sure that staff have enough time to be able to put comments on passports, to be able to share those ideas. We have something called professional communities where we have time as a team and we split into smaller teams so that there's time for everybody to talk, where we share good practice and what's working. And I think that for you to be able to fully realise that goal, it is about that saying, okay, so we've got 2 hours of twilight, we're dedicating that to this because it's this important to our school priorities. It's this important that we dedicate the time to being able to understand our children and to being able to sort of record and capture those brilliant things that we do.
And I'm guessing all the passports have the photos on. So when that child comes in, you're immediately knowing, he's the one who likes wrestling. You're knowing that the moment they walk in, you're not kind of waiting for it to go wrong, to go, oh, hang on. Oh, yep, there is one in my class. I should have done. That's the sort of thing where I think when children go from one teacher to the next, does that teacher know what I need? Do they know that I need my support? Are they going to... It's those sorts of worries for children. And I think from all the work you're doing, that's happening. That kind of, from one teacher to the next, whatever's happening, that child will feel supported by their new teacher because they've had that information passed on.
Yeah, and the key thing is it's one side of A4. It's not a 50-page diagnostic report. And actually, I've met this student that I've got a really good grip of what worked for them at the very end of the summer last year. So it's really up to date, because the other thing with diagnostic reports, of course, is a lot of them were written when children were 4, 5, 6. So you're reading these reams and reams of paper that largely don't depict the child that you're about to meet anyway. So I've got this really up-to-date, really robust record of what worked for that child in July. At this moment, I can really hit the ground running. And then as I get to know that child and as I can picture them in my mind, as you say, because I've not met them yet. So once you've met somebody, then you can think, okay, now I'm going to have a deep dive into some of those records, because of course they are useful. That information is there, and information is power and knowledge is power. But until we've met a child and really get to know them, we don't really know what we're sort of digging into these reams of paper for. So once we know what we're struggling with, then we can start to become the detectives, which is what we're really good at as teachers. That's the whole sort of premise of adaptive teaching, is we try things out, and when they work, it's magic. And when they don't work, we try something different. That is what teaching is at the heart of it.
So over the last 3 years, would you say in your school things like detentions, internal exclusion, all those, have they reduced over the last 3 years?
Yeah, 100%. So our suspensions are down 70% since all the work we've done on inclusion, but since our Send Champions programme as well. Our behaviour has dropped significantly, so lesson removals. Children are in front of us more. Our attendance has improved because children feel that they belong. Children have adults that know them well, so when they go into classrooms, they meet their needs better, but they want to be in classrooms, so therefore they aren't removed from classrooms. They are, and when children are in front of us, we can do a great job. We can teach them. They can make better progress. So all measures are improving in our school.
And it's not a case to achieve this, you've removed boundaries. The boundaries are still there, but because you have those relationships, those boundaries are respected.
Yeah, 100%. With high challenge, you need high support. And with those things, everybody wins.
So no one's losing. Children are in lesson more, less disruption, so all children's outcomes are being improved. Doesn't seem to be a downside.
No, and I think that the biggest thing is that demystification. And I think that is at the core of what so many schools are struggling with across the country, whether it's primary, secondary, special. I think that in everything that you hear in sort of the sort of SEND reviews that are happening, the assessment and curriculum reviews, the challenge is relationships. It is, how do we make sure that teachers feel empowered to be able to make those decisions in the classroom to adapt provision to meet the children's needs in front of them.
I'm being slightly sarcastic with my questioning and being quite blunt. The reason being is all the stuff you're doing is all the stuff I've talked about for so long on the podcast. It's so obvious what they need to do this, they need to do this, they need to do this. And everything I've talked about for years on the podcast you're doing in your school, which is really, really amazing to hear. And all the hope that everyone says it will do this is actually exactly what's happening. The disruptions down. I'm hoping things like EBSA is reduced in your school. The attendance is up. And it's people say, yeah, the attendance will be up, this will all happen. But you're a school putting it all into practice, doing it all. As you said, you're not a superhero alone. You are part of that big team believing in it. But in reality, you're giving every single student in your school better outcomes, not just those with SEND. The disruption is having less impact. The relationships are there for everyone. It's not just people with SEND who will benefit from these relationships with staff. Everyone will benefit, including the teachers. And it really is. There is no real negative side to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's not to say it's perfect all the time. You know, we're a school and we live in the real world, and, you know, it's not going to be perfect all the time. But when you have a really strong relationship with a pupil, when things have gone wrong, it also helps you to be able to restore that relationship too. So we're big believers in restorative practice, but that can only happen when you have a relationship, because actually, if you don't have a relationship with that child and something's gone wrong in a lesson, which it will from time to time, and you go to see them and you sit down and you want to talk about, you know, I felt really upset when you threw something because you felt angry. Let's talk about that. If you don't have a relationship with that child, they're going to laugh at you and sort of not be open to that conversation. So all that work comes much earlier, and it comes from that asking them about the things they did at the weekend, asking them what they did over the summer and who was at home. Do you have brothers, sisters? What do they like to do? And I think that without that groundwork, those relationships and those conversations, when things do go wrong, are going to be less successful. And that's where a lot of our work happens. It happens early in the year because you've got to put sort of deposits in the relationship bank early on, but it has to continue throughout the school year as well. I think that those sort of conversations and that effort sort of is as important, if not more important, during those dark months in December and January when everybody's feeling really tired as well. And that's where sort of, if you look at any school's data, any school's behaviour records, you'll see a spike because children are tired, staff are tired, and that's when relationships become more strained because everybody's tired and everybody's ready for the break as well. But actually, if you've put the work in and you can continue to put the work in, that becomes easier because actually, oh, Bobby, are you not feeling 100% today? That conversation can turn that day around for that child and then mean that he goes on to have a really successful day or she goes on to have a really successful day.
So you've mentioned the SEND champions. Mm-hmm. Are these specific people in the school?
Yeah, so what was really important to us when we first sort of envisaged the programme is that the SEND champion was somebody that taught the child, because we wanted it to matter to staff, we wanted it to be successful, we wanted it to matter to children as well. So I sort of imparted on the biggest jigsaw puzzle and most complex jigsaw puzzle ever, which was getting the timetable from a data manager with all the teachers and trying to make that work so that every child was paired up with somebody that teaches them or that works with them, because it's not just our teaching staff that are SEND champions, it's our non-teaching staff too, so our learning support assistants as well. everybody is a SEND champion for 2 children. That worked really, really well in the first year because it meant that you saw your child, the child that you're a champion for, at least a couple of times a week. It sort of naturally allowed those conversations to happen. When we came to the summer term, because what was really, really important as we rolled this program out is that we regularly shared with staff the impact that the program was having. So this is the impact it's had on attendance. This is the impact it's had on progress. This is the impact that your efforts have had on behaviour, on even things like going to extracurricular. Extracurricular is up significantly because we're having conversations and children know what extracurricular there is that's available. So therefore, inclusion is improving because our children are included and they're going to all these wonderful activities that we offer. And along the way, we asked for staff voice as well. So when we got to the summer term and we shared with staff, we shared some case studies. And what I did was I shared, it was really lovely. I shared a parent, student and staff member's voice for a few different case studies of the impact it had on the parent and their knowledge of what's happening in school. Because part of our cycle is that we ring home and we check in on the pupil and how they felt in school and the support that they'd had, but also the staff member and the difference it had on their teaching and learning. So that was a really powerful thing to do in our feedback. And when we asked staff to give us feedback, because we're a team and we work sort of both ways, staff said, actually, I've invested a lot of time into my relationship with this pupil and I'm really invested in seeing how they progress as time goes on. And I want to keep my SEND champion moving forward. So from the second year onwards, sort of year 11 came out and year 7 went in again with teachers that teach them. But the remaining sort of the children stayed with their SEND champions because staff overwhelmingly wanted that to be the way the programme sort of naturally progressed.
I wonder if there was like a parallel universe that maybe just before you started there, like there was like a split in the universe and there's this approach you're doing and the approach of the other version of school was exactly how they other schools. And I wonder how many children, if we flipped over to that other universe, some of these children would have a reputation in the staff room that people don't like that child. And it's generally that relationship. The big difference is there's no relationship. So where you see that child is being naughty, disruptive, never learning, never doing their homework, start to build that relationship. Now you understand why. Now you want to help them.
Yeah.
Now you want to see actually what's happening. And it's that power of the relationship and having the time and maybe slightly forcing teachers to build those relationships at the beginning to see the benefit. But everything comes from those relationships.
Yeah, so one thing that our head teacher will do every year is, and I'm sure that this happens in all secondary schools, when you come in for Inset Day, you talk about the children and how they achieved in their GCSEs in their results. And lots of schools will put children's faces on the board that got all 9s and look how brilliant this is. But what our head teacher will do is he will put the case study of the child on the board that was targeted to get all grade 1s and had real challenges in their sort of personal lives and actually got a grade 2 or a grade 3 and look at the value that we've added in the teamwork that we've done. And this is some of the work that went into getting that child into school every day. And this is some of the work that this colleague did in a relationship to be able to support that child with this challenge. And look, they got a grade 4 in their English. So it's not about those children that get those sort of gold star grade 9s in every single subject. It's about those children that we really added value to or that overcame adversity to succeed. And what does that success look like in our schools? And I think that sort of is really important when you're thinking about inclusion in your school, is which children do you celebrate and actually which children deserve to be celebrated more. And I think that is sort of a real poster of what our school stands for, and that is something that we do every year and I've always done and always will do, because that's where we're really proud of the work that we do with our children.
And I wonder, as part of that, kind of where they were, where they were expected, where they got to, and you talked about that professional curiosity. I wonder how much that professional curiosity has grown when you're now invested in those children.
Yeah, because I tell you, you look around that room at 100 members of staff, and every single member of staff has got a smile on their face hearing that story, because even whether we've taught that child or not, we all know that child, we all know the challenges that they had and the work that went into helping them be successful. And that then grows the pride in what we do to ensure that professional curiosity continues and that momentum continues. And that is a really powerful thing, to look around a room and see every single teacher in your school and non-teacher with a smile on their face because of the work you've done with a child.
That's phenomenal. And it's, again, there are children who, no matter what you do in a school, are going to get all nines. Yeah.
And they deserve to be celebrated too, because they've worked really, really hard. Of course they do. And all children deserve to be celebrated for whatever results they have, because the truth is our GCSE system is really challenging. I've never been more challenging. So all of our children deserve to be celebrated.
But it is, yeah, sometimes we just focus on those highest achievers and all nine, all that, like, well done. You're going, yeah, there was an external tutor involved. There was this involved, that involved. You gave them this opportunity. It's all these, and it's other children who haven't had those opportunities, as maybe beating your expectations, beating their own expectations, surprising themselves because maybe someone believed in them and they've not maybe had that in their life. And perhaps where they thought their life was going to be and where it's heading is actually completely different, and they hadn't contemplated that they could achieve that. They're the ones where you've literally, not figuratively, you've literally changed their future life just by that relationship, believing in them, finding out about them, supporting them in an area, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that when visitors come to our school, one thing that they sort of are always astounded by, I mean, we have sort of close to 1,300 children on our roll, is that nearly all staff know nearly all the names of children in our school as they pass them on the corridor and say good morning. And I think that, again, that sort of that culture, it's just on all different levels, it has to sort of be the golden thread through your school, because then everything else will come with it.
I do youth work on a Monday night with like 10 teenagers. I'm still struggling with some of their names.
I think it is a superpower of a teacher as well, to be fair. We have to learn names very quickly.
It so is. My wife just starts throwing names at me when she was teaching, and I'm literally trying to keep up. It's like I need like a family tree thing of, is this a TA or is this a student she's talking about? I'm not quite sure. Yeah, you teachers.
We'll pass somebody in town that I taught 10 years ago, and I'll have a conversation with them. And then my husband will say, who was that? And I'll tell him who it was. And he'll go, but you can't remember what you had for breakfast this morning. How? So I do think it's part of being a teacher.
No comment at all. Especially one that will be recorded. So when this journey you've been on, how on board were people at the beginning? How was it? Was it a case of, we don't want to do it, but the head teacher's making it? Was there buy-in from the beginning? Was there hesitation?
That is a really good question. And it's a question that when people come and visit us, they say to us, how do you get your staff to do that? Because actually that's a lot of investment of time from teaching staff. So what happened was, sort of, I met with the deputy head and the head teacher at the time, and we sort of spoke about how important our SEND Champions programme was going to be, what we wanted it to look like. And we planned our implementation to take place over the next school year. And we spoke to the teaching team in July. So we were going to start to implement this in September, and we met with staff in the summer term to say, this is what we're going to do from September, and this is why it's important. And what was really key to that, actually, is that the head teacher delivered that message, because going back to the beginning, it's not about the SENDCO working on their own. It's about all of the leadership team living and breathing inclusion. So it was really important that that message was delivered by sort of the senior team as a whole. So I did a bit, the head did a bit, and we sort of spoke together. But the first thing that he did was he put a slide on the board, and we show this slide often, that says that nationally, pupils with SEND are less likely to attend school. When they're in school, they are more likely to be removed from lessons. And when they are removed from lessons, they are more likely to be suspended. So our children are more likely to not be in front of us. And that is a national statistic that we cannot shy away from. And what he sort of said to our teaching team was, if we don't do something to change this narrative, nobody will. And we need to be courageous and sort of book that trend, because actually, you know, we're looking at a SEND register in most schools that can be up to 20%, and 40% of children will have been on the SEND register at some point in their educational journey. So therefore, if these children are not getting the best from us, which is why we come into education, we are failing a large amount of children through the education them through the time that they're in school and in front of us. So that was kind of where we started from. And we made sure that staff were aware of why we were implementing this, and that it wasn't just something to tick a box. It wasn't just to say, the code of practice says we have to review provision 3 times a year. So that's why we're going to all spend loads of time typing up what we do in classrooms. It was about, this is the challenge that we face, and through our relationship, we can definitely make a difference for all of these children that sort of come through our doors. And that will make our teaching better as well. As a result of that, your teaching practice will improve because of your professional curiosity. Your adaptive teaching will improve because you'll be able to share best practice with each other, and we will all therefore win. So naturally, there were a few staff that were a little bit nervous. So we did have a few members of staff come to us and say, where are we going to find the time to do this? I teach 30 children out of my 200 children that are on the SEN register, and if I have to write a sentence for 3 sentences for all 30 of those children, that's a big time commitment. So we made sure that we carved out time to allow staff to do it, because it was really important to us. We'd said to staff why it was sort of one of our school improvement priorities, why it was so key to us improving and giving the best to children. So therefore, we need to give the best to our staff and make sure they've got time to do the thing we're asking them to do. And then the truth is that come Christmas, after we'd had a term and things were getting better in classrooms, you could see the real difference it was making to attendance. Children were wanting to come to school more. Children were in our classrooms, and behaviour incidents were dropping, and we were sharing that with staff. That's the key thing, is if you don't tell staff, they don't always realise, because they're stood in your classroom for 20 odd hours a week. Then staff became excited and the momentum started to build, and staff really bought into it. And then what was magical is sort of the SEND champions of pupils were meeting with pupils and emailing their teachers and copying me in, saying, I've just had a conversation with this child and they're telling me this would help in the classroom. Can you try it? So the next step then became empowering the children, and the children really knowing what works for them. And that's really magical, because actually our children are leaving us at 16, and we expect them to have the metacognitive skills to know how they learn. I mean, when I went to college and university, I didn't know how I learned best, because I'd sat in front of a teacher who had told me to make a mind map or to answer questions in full sentences. So the next step then becomes our children saying, actually, for me to be able to learn best, I need to have this in addition to, different from. Is it okay if I try and sit here? Or is it okay if I record those notes by making a mind map instead of writing in full sentences, because I'm going to take it in better? And that was something that happened sort of in the second term, and that was something that was really amazing to see.
So literally within a term, you really had changed the direction, and not just you felt it. You could probably graph CPOMs, attendance, all the data was showing there is a difference, which then built on to more buy-in from those staff, more buy-in from the students. And that impact is not just felt like, oh, at the end of the year, that's the impact done. Is in reality, there are children who may have been with you for 2 years, really starting to fall out of love with the school. You were changing that relationship. Future children would not be kind of going down. You're changing the path of every child, current and future, coming to your school.
Yeah, and I think that sort of that work started a few years prior to that, because before we started on this journey, we started really on that relationship journey, and that was really key, because as a staff body, that was really part of our embedded in our practice. So those restorative conversations after something had gone wrong, that's been a part of our sort of language. I mean, I've been at my school now for 8.5 years, and it's always been part of our language, and it's something that we explicitly revisit and that we work on as a team, and to the point where we will coach each other and we'll watch each other have conversations with children, because actually that is something that we need to develop as part of our practice as well. Part of your teacher training should be those relationship building, I think.
So my question was, and you've confirmed it, so you became SENDCO in 2022, but you started teaching at the school in 2016. So is it a case of that actually that becoming the SENDCO at that school you already knew? Was it a case of the strategy was being built and you're going, right, this is the direction we're going in because you were part of that school and you kind of knew where to go? Did that help?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that having relationships with families already definitely helped. Prior to being SENDCO, I was a head of year, so having that pastoral experience really, really set me in good stead. And I've previously worked in special schools, so I had that SEN background. I've worked in special schools. I worked in 2 different special schools prior to being at Marvel. So I think that all of those things put together really help. But the one thing that we did that really put me in good stead, and that I would sort of say to anybody that's new to role, is we conducted a SEND review straight away when I came to role. So we wanted to work out, where are we at? Let's go back to basics. Let's go back to ground zero. Let's look at things as a big picture, get a big holistic view so that we can be strategic, not just operational. And I think that lots of SENDCOs fall into that pitfall of being operational, because you come into school and you've got 15 emails from 15 parents before 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's so easily done. I think that being able to have that big picture view and making sure you carve out time at specific points in the year to look at, okay, what are our big picture priorities as a school, is really, really key. And a SEND review can really help with that. So we started off with a whole school SEND review. And again, we did that as a senior team. That wasn't just something that I did in isolation. And it's something that anybody that completes the MPQ SEND will do. I did it as part of Manor SENDCO when I came to role. And I do still revisit that at least annually, because it helps me keep that big picture. And I think that is really key. As part of that, one of the main things that we did, and that I think anybody that is new to role should do, is a really in-depth review of the SEND register. So we should be doing that 3 times a year anyway. But what lots of schools will find is that there are children on SEND registers that have had time-limited intervention when they were very, very young, and for one reason or another have largely stayed on a SEND register but don't need something in addition to or different from. And we found that with our SEN register when we reviewed it. So that then sort of breeds that nervousness of staff, because if this is a child in front of me that my register says they need something in addition to or different from, but I can't work it out because actually that child doesn't need that anymore, I then feel disempowered because I feel like I can't work that out and I'm therefore failing that child. So if you don't have the right children on the SEN register, how can your teachers then be able to adapt provision to meet their needs? And if you don't have the right children on the SEN register, I can guarantee that any support plans, any reports, any information is also significantly out of date. So my biggest piece of advice for somebody new to role would be to look at your SEN register, every single child in detail, speak to parents, because actually a lot of parents that we rang and spoke to didn't know that their child was on the SEN register. So they can't have had anything in addition to or different from, or any communication over all of those years, because the parents didn't even know that that was happening. They didn't know that they were on this magic register. So I think your register is only worth as much as the time you put into it. And that is something that was really powerful in our shift and in our review of our SEN provision in school.
I think one of the things I was thinking about as we've been talking is probably as a SENDCO, you came along with, this is what I need to do right now, but this is my aim for where we'll be in a year, 2 years. But actually having that audit told you, where are we? And I wonder how many SENDCOs arrive in a new school being told, yeah, there's a couple of issues, almost band-aiding things, thinking it's not a big problem, and then not actually stepping back and going, actually, these band-aids are doing nothing. There's a really big problem. Actually, something's completely missing, or actually what you're expecting to be there isn't there. So I think having that audit right at the beginning really helps you say, this is where we are. This is our starting point. What do we need to change?
And I think the other really good thing with a big audit, a big SEND review, is that then when you come to revisit it in 12 months, 6 months, however often you decide that you need to look at it for your school, you can also celebrate the successes and see the progress that you've made as well. So during those dark months where things are getting really hard, and you see it on social media, don't you? SENDCOs really struggling, particularly around that New Year time and sort of and about this time of the year in the summer term. Actually taking a step back and looking at, okay, so how much has attendance improved? How much has behaviour improved? But actually, have I got any student voice for this year? Have I asked pupils how they feel in our school? Because that can be amazing. When you've had a hard week and a pupil tells you that somebody's made a difference in their life, or that you've made a difference, and that actually they now enjoy that maths lesson that they were finding hard, but you've sat down and you've unpicked it with them, and now they're finding that they can understand what's happening in that lesson because of a small change you made. That helps you see that big picture and helps you see sort of the difference that you're making as well. And that really is why we all become SENDCOs, isn't it? Because when that happens, that's magic.
But also, you might be in a situation where if you haven't got the audit, you don't know where you were, you don't really know where you are now. Having an audit, you do at the beginning of the school year, you get to the end of the school year, you kind of review it again and going, actually, we've made no progress. That's still a very important thing. You might be making difference on a couple of individual pupils but overall, you might be literally going, yeah, we've made no progress. It's not, and that's the big thing, not I've made no progress as a SENDCO. Yeah, you are literally signposting, setting the direction. It's a whole school journey you're on. So it's not I've made no progress on this, it's we have made no progress.
And I guess then it's who are you going to share that audit with? So are you going to sit with your senior leadership team? Are you going to sit with your head teacher? Who are the stakeholders in that audit? Because a lot of the SEND reviews have down the final column, who is responsible for this? And if your initials are in every single column, then you're not really living that ethos of inclusion. So that's a key thing as well is, okay, we're going to review this. I think this year we'll review it sort of termly, and next year we might review it biannually, and then hopefully we'll go annually, whatever that might look like for your school. But who's going to be sat in that room when you talk about the progress you're making and what you're going to do next? Because those leaders need to be part of that conversation all the way through, not just at the beginning, or not just when you're asking them to deliver something to staff because you're conscious you don't want it to be the SENDCO. It has to be that at all levels and sort of threaded through those conversations you're having.
And it should be a case of, yes, we all agree, you do that. It's got to be that distributed leadership. This is everyone's responsibility. The SENDCO is there to coordinate it and try to make sure it's happening. And when it's not happening, draw everyone's attention to it, almost like a governor of SEND in that kind of way. But it's not, they're not doing everything. They're kind of like, look, there's a framework we need to follow. Here's the framework. This is what we all need to do. That's kind of that SENDCO role. It's not, this is my responsibility. I'm the one. I'm that superhero who's being dragged down by everything. No, you are part of a team.
Yeah, and I think it's about, when something is going wrong, or when there's a parent that's coming in to discuss something, because actually we need to do some digging and work out what a child needs. Are you going into that meeting as a SENDCO on your own with that parent? Or are you taking the head of year with you, or your inclusion manager, or whoever that might be in your school, so that they can experience you delivering that conversation and become upskilled? Because I think what we're not very good at in schools is we're not time rich, and nobody has time. We're so busy all of the time. And in a day, you can go from meeting to meeting to meeting. And we've all had days where we've not eaten our lunch, or we can't quite find the time to pop to the loo because it's been that busy. But actually, thinking to yourself, I'm having this meeting, is there somebody that would really benefit from me scaffolding this conversation to help them with having that conversation? Because increasingly, parents ring and come to us with concerns that their child might have neurodiversity. They want to do some digging and investigating. And actually, we should all be skilled enough to have those conversations in a school. It shouldn't just be the SENDCO, because the other thing that can be quite detrimental is when staff aren't upskilled to have those conversations, and they try and have the conversation but actually sort of don't give parents the information they need, or give misinformation, and then that can cause that challenging parents where you feel like you're going from pillar to post, or you feel like people are fobbing you off. And I think that's one thing that is really important in our SEND Champions program, is that we build positive relationships just by ringing and checking in and saying, I've spoken to Florence and she's loving netball club, and it's not I'm ringing because something's gone wrong, because lots of parents, their only experience of speaking to school, the phone ringing, we've all rang a parent and they've gone, oh, what have they done now? So it's that having the opportunity to say, actually, I'm ringing just to check in, and is there anything on your mind, or is there anything that you feel like we should talk about? Because then when you do have the more challenging conversations, you've got the relationship with the parent. It's the same as what I was saying about the child. When something goes wrong with the child, you've got the relationship. But actually, when something goes wrong, or when there's a problem to talk about, or something we're worried about, we've got a relationship already, so that conversation becomes easier.
So you mentioned neurodiversity there, which then sparked a question in my head. You've obviously got those on your SEND register, you've got those with the HCPs, you've got all these SEND champions, great. What about that child who is in top set 2, academically doing well, but they have a diagnosis of autism, no adaptation needed in terms of learning, or, like my daughter, masks a lot, not on the SEND register, 6s, 7s, doing really well. Has the way your school is kind of embedded those relationships, all the things, has that benefited those students as well?
Yeah, I mean, so relationships are threaded through sort of every communication we have with children, and we're really proud of that. For children that have a diagnosis but don't necessarily need to be on the SEN register because they don't necessarily need anything in addition to or different from, we still sort of have notes on their profile. So on our registers, if you hover over a button, it pops up and it'll say what the diagnosis is. And sometimes it might say, so for example, it might say visual stress and a coloured overlay that they use, or it might say ASD diagnosis and that they need sort of extra processing time, or they might need a seat in a specific place in the room. They're sort of just high quality teaching adaptations. So we want to make sure staff still have that information, because that can be the difference between a child having a really good day in school or actually it's gone wrong in period 1. I'm going to stew on that all day. I'm going to go home. I'm going to have a meltdown, and then my whole week's sort of written off. So we do still communicate that with staff. We have tutor times as well, so that every pupil has a form tutor that they have a really positive relationship with. And as part of our form tutor role, we sort of not empower, that's not the right word. We build in opportunities to have those conversations, to build relationships with everybody. So, yeah, I mean, that's not to say things are perfect all the time, because they're never going to be in a school. But
No, but I think it's a really hard group that's growing at the moment. They're not on the SEND register. There's nothing academically going, we need help here. But actually the social side, their mental health is kind of where they're struggling. But there isn't a struggling here, isn't a list. So it's kind of like there is no official, no obvious, but actually they do need a little bit of support, bit of nurture. But I think a lot of that, with that relationships, that will come.
And I think as well, that comes back to us thinking about, what do our classrooms look like? And actually, it's not just about me doing something different for X child. Actually, what I do for one child with SEND will benefit all children in my classroom, irrelevant of whether they have a SEND need or not. Displaying something visually as well as verbally is going to help any child learn, because good teaching for a pupil with SEND is good teaching for any child. So I think it's about really thinking, okay, what do I do to make my classroom really inclusive, and how does that help the really high ability, quiet girl that's struggling with something that I don't really fully understand, or actually that really quiet girl who's chosen to have that seat at the back of my classroom that does everything I ask them to do. When we start our 20-minute application test, why don't I just go and check in with them first and make sure they know exactly what they're doing, and make them feel seen in my classroom? Because do they feel seen in my classroom, or do they see that I always go to X student that I've sat somewhere strategically at the start of every task as well? So it's that sort of being really aware, I think, as a teacher, of all the pupils in your classroom, which I think is a challenge when you have big classrooms. But that can be as little as the children come in to start my lesson, good morning, how are you today? I noticed you did some great work last lesson. I'm really looking forward to reading what you write for me today. Those little conversations have such a big impact on our young people.
I think, yeah, definitely. And I think relationships, knowing the children, what works for SEN, I think kind of just embedding those in that kind of the day-to-day school life is going to support those children better. And there's loads of research. I think it was like most people are excluded are neurodiverse. And then there was, I can't remember the numbers, I'll probably get completely wrong, but it was like the worst thing about school is the teachers don't know me or understand me. And I think those relationships and building those relationships is key to supporting that. One thing we haven't discussed, and your school doesn't do this, but this is one of the challenges I've come across in schools, is the idea of like the schools being in silos. So you've got the maths department, they stay isolated from everyone else. The English department, they stay isolated from everyone else. And you don't have that communication kind of across departments. So but all the things you've talked about, like getting together on the inset days and 100 teachers all sharing, I think in a lot of schools that doesn't really happen. They kind of have that very much leadership, and then departments, and they never leave those departments, which means when you're supporting, when an English teacher, there's an issue or they're seeing something, you're not getting that big picture of everyone contributing to that child. So basically, from everything you've said is schools shouldn't be siloed. It should be, as much as possible, everyone working together.
Yeah, and I think that's something that you have to be really explicit in your intention, because I think that the truth is the way our schools are built is we have a maths corridor, an English corridor, a science corridor, and they might have a science workroom. And in your day to day, unless you explicitly make time for it, you might only see those colleagues in science. And therefore, they're the people that you would ask questions about your teaching. And sort of that can be bred really easily in a school. So I think that is something that needs to be really explicitly sort of thought through. And that's where the teaching and learning team in our school have sort of created those professional communities to be able to enable opportunities for conversation with different colleagues. And part of that professional communities cycle is that we pair colleagues from different departments up, and between meetings, which are like once every half term, you go and observe them teach. And they observe you. No pressure. Just pop in for 5 minutes and see what's happening in my classroom. Because actually, where do you learn the most? You learn the most seeing somebody else teach and do something differently. I mean, as a senior leader, I get the absolute pleasure of observing lots of colleagues teach, and I always take something from every single colleague that I see teach. So therefore, our sort of newest colleagues, our ECTs, our early years, our teachers that are very new to their career, we need to be giving them the opportunity to do that. And by doing that, they're then making a relationship with a colleague from a different department, and especially a colleague from a different department that's also early in their career. Because actually, if I come in and observe you teach, you're probably not going to ask me that question as a senior leader. Well, I'd like to think you would, but you might not, that you think's a bit silly. But actually, if your colleague that you started in September and you're both in the first year comes and observes you, you might ask them that question. So again, you've got that support network. So there's loads of positives that come from sort of breeding that culture that we're not working in silos in a school.
Nice. And I'm going to wrap it up there. I've really enjoyed this episode. It's really nice hearing, as I said, hearing all those things we talk about, all the things I moan about that aren't happening in a secondary school. And not only can you say, oh, it's making a difference, you could pull out loads of graphs showing it is making a difference.
Yeah, and we always welcome visitors and people to come into school. We like to share with people, and sort of if we could impact other children in different schools, we're more than welcome if people have listened to the podcast and want to pop in and see what we're doing or have a conversation with us, more than welcome to do so.
Excellent. Thank you for coming on the show today. As always, you'll find Ellie's contact details and a link to the school website in our show notes. And as always, you'll find the show notes wherever you listen to the podcast or on our website. And if you want to get in touch, let us know your thoughts, suggest topics or anything else, please message us via social media or send an email to hello@thesencast.com. The SENDCast is created and produced by us here at B Squared, and we help to show the small steps of progress pupils with SEND make. And we help schools to show progress for a wide range of abilities and ages. We have a range of frameworks to suit students from birth all the way through to 25, from our early years and our engagement model stuff, all the way through to our Steps for Life framework, which has academic skills, employability skills, and life skills. Visit the B Square website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software and how it can help you. So thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the SENDCast. It's goodbye from me.
Thank you for having me, Dale.
Bye, everyone.